I wanted to kind of reflect a little on some of the politics of the time as well as since. And John's opening remarks and summary of the learning age, I think, helps us to do that. I was struggling kind of this morning trying to think of the right metaphor for the learning age, and we've already had the confetti, John's confetti, which I hadn't thought of, and Lorna's wrecking ball, which I also hadn't thought of, but it did bring to mind the recent report that the Institute for Government did on skills reform, saying that T-levels, which aren't yet introduced, as we know, but that T-levels represented the 29th major piece of skills reform that we've witnessed in this system since the early 1980s. Now, of course, the learning age and lots of bits around it that John described kind of sit in that number, as do a huge number of other things since. You may not be reassured to hear that in all of the talk of Deering, Kennedy and others, that on Monday the government are announcing the terms of the major tertiary review that they trailed in the election manifesto from last year. So it's clear that that kind of wrecking ball approach applies to governments of the same, arguably of the same kind of set of interests, and of course they applied during kind of New Labour's time too. But to go back to the confetti point, I think it's a very good metaphor, because essentially the learning age was confetti thrown by a lot of different people. It was a collection of ideas that lots of people had spent a lot of time thinking about and campaigning for. And it was kind of stitched together into this policy document, which was a moment of massive expectation, not just from all of those people that had put all that effort in and created those little kind of bits of policy, but also, of course, for the government as a whole, because as John reminded us, it was a government that had come into power after a very, very long period of Conservative government. So it inevitably, therefore, feels like and reads like and rereads like a collection of opposition commitments that had worked well as sound bites, but hadn't necessarily been worked up into kind of sufficient detail to make them work as policies. I was struck rereading it that there were a lot more commitments and programmes than there was money. There was certainly, when you added up the kind of few million here and a few million there, in government terms, it didn't seem very much, but I kind of had to remind myself that one of Labour's great election pledges pre-97 was to stick to the Conservative spending plans at that time. So, of course, there wasn't much money to go around for a document like that. But I think it also reminds me that there wasn't even the kind of unanimity across the ministerial team or the government, or indeed even the different authors that had produced the different elements of work that the learning age had drawn on, about kind of which were priorities and how they would fit together. So whether that be for priority spending or the kind of policy mix, the level of expectation was always going to be hard to meet. And thinking about the University for Industry in particular, which sounded great in the run-up to 1997, fantastic soundbite to use to defend in any kind of political interview, any kind of Today programme interview, in any campaign moment. The University for Industry was going to solve all of this. It was going to improve British productivity, and it was going to kind of be done somehow through the haze of technology. But the detail kind of didn't matter. And I remember interviewing a guy who used to work for Blair and Brown at that time, who said that kind of this was a bit of policy that Gordon Brown had taken ownership of, but had developed nothing within it. So, and he described it as a kind of an empty box come 97. No one really knew, beyond the fact that it was a great soundbite in a campaign, what it was going to do and how it was going to work. And I remember one of the early kind of round tables trying to work exactly out how it was going to work, where everyone pointed out that it wasn't a university. It wasn't really for industry. And that was kind of where that started. And in many ways, I must admit, I look at thinking around the National Education Service and kind of think, sounds a bit familiar. Great idea, great election slogan, but how it works, how it fits together, and how it delivers the kind of things it needs to deliver isn't yet done. There is time, of course. As Lorna kind of intimated, I think, you know, there are inevitably lots of different perspectives within the learning age, lots of different philosophies, and the one where I think most failure was most apparent most quickly was in this kind of thinking around training policy, the demand side, as John described it. And this, of course, was an ongoing problem that New Labour never solved. From University for Industry and individual learning accounts to the Learning and Skills Council, to sector skills councils, the amount and frequency of change kind of was not matched by any kind of results in those places. But what it did reveal, I think, which I could detect looking at the learning age, was the beginnings of this constant fault line between sort of more liberal view of adult education and higher education, and a kind of a more economic view, and that's already been mentioned. But it was that fault line was also there always, I think, between the Department for Education and those inside it, and the Treasury, Gordon Brown and David Blunkett, which would be interesting to hear his views in it. And of course, you know, Blair, theoretically above both of them, was kind of pretty disinterested in the agenda as a whole and the different elements of it. But Brown's primary interest was always in productivity, because he knew that ultimately had to pay for all of this stuff at a moment of constrained spending. Blunkett's interests, I think, were different, were broader, around life chances, rights, and the state. And it's not as simple to characterise it as a kind of markets v state argument, but there were elements of that within it. But it's clear that, you know, you take not just the University for Industry, but the Learning and Skills Council, which was created in a fanfare, and was this massive state planning body that existed at a time when the Treasury were much more interested in skills, employers, the demand side, however badly they design policy to service it. But I think kind of my sort of final kind of point for now is that ultimately you have to get both sides of thinking about this right. You know, you can't solve one part of it and ignore the other. One has to pay for all sorts of things, not way beyond education. You know, it's unwise and impractical to create a massive collection of commitments and not really think through how they're going to mesh together over the long term. I think there were some very good ideas in the learning age. I think the poorer ideas were in how the skills agenda would work economically. They've continued to be poor ideas since that time, and I think kind of, you know, the fundamental need to make those two work connected together is the problem that we are still trying to solve, and which come Monday, you know, we'll see another attempt to kind of find a way of bringing FE and HE together into a system that kind of delivers all of this stuff. I suspect, like many of us here, don't hold out a huge amount of hope for that happening, but I think it kind of, you know, it tells us that the wrecking ball, if nothing else, continues. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Andy. Good.